Now, the Ghana Boundary Commission is facilitating the construction of the first feeder road to border community of Dollar Power in the Savannah region. This follows the Commission's first visit to the area in 2021. The road is being constructed by the Ministry of Roads with the 48 Engineers Regiment as contractors. Addressing the press during a visit to the area and a community sensitization program, National Coordinator of the Ghana Boundary Commission, Major General Emmanuel Kotia, said the road will help with the regular inspection of the international boundary line between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. It will also help security agencies get easy access to the area. Maxwell Agbagba has more in this report.
Welcome to Dollar Power. In this community, there are no access roads, so the community people only use motorbikes. We're here with the Ghana Boundary Commission. We are doing an inspection of Ghana's international boundary line with Cote d'Ivoire. Major General Emmanuel Kotia has been addressing the press after visiting the site himself on a motorbike. He says Ghana Boundary Commission is working together with the 48 Engineer Regiment to provide some feeder roads. This, he says, will help with the regular inspection of Ghana's international boundary line with Cote d'Ivoire. He says it would also improve security here in this community.
Tucked away from the eagle eyes of security agencies, some residents here are causing devastating damage to the environment with impunity. The lack of roads at Dollar Power has made policing very difficult. There is no police station. This has given rise to many challenges like illegal mining and more. Speaking during a sensitization program organized by the Ghana Boundary Commission, DC for the area, Veronica Alele, says the construction of the road will make the community easily accessible.
Bridge no ye beye enra wo de wo niema nyina besi ho se wo beye bridge no na wo yi kwan no beye kwan no fe e amamu. We need to give them a feeder road because the border itself is motor lane. So if we have a feeder road, it will help the forestry to monitor the activities. It will also help the people themselves to actually monitor activities of criminals and all sorts of people, the ones who just come into Ghana and run back. So that will help them. And then the police station is very key. If we can need a post, a police post to put here, it will help.
A core function of the Ghana Boundary Commission is identifying challenges in border communities and collaborating with relevant state institutions to address them. The Commission is bringing together state institutions to address the challenges in Dollar Power. National Coordinator of the Ghana Boundary Commission, Major General Emmanuel Kotia, says the Commission is facilitating the construction of a road. He says this will help with the regular inspection of the international boundary line between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. It will also help with regular patrols by the security agencies.
One of the key challenges that we find here is accessibility, especially road accessibility to the area. As a result of that, security agencies and other agencies are not able to undertake. One thing we have done as a Boundary Commission is to facilitate the construction of a feeder road. And as I'm speaking to you, the 48 Engineer Regiment has started putting their resources together, and the feeder road is going to be constructed along the international boundary line to Dollar Power. In that regard, one is going to serve two purposes. The first purpose is for that road to aid inspection, regular inspection of the international boundary line and especially the pillars. And the second purpose is to aid any security agencies or any other agency like the Minerals Commission to undertake activities in this general area. You will realize that you can only access here, we can only access here by motor, and going around by air, and going around Dollar Power, we can only move around with motorbikes because there is no road within the community.
Speaking during a community sensitization program, Major General Emmanuel Kotia urged the residents to safeguard the international boundary line between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire.
We had reports about the tampering and displacement of boundary pillars in this community. We came for the inspection, verified a number of boundary pillars along the international boundary line between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire removed. As a result of that, we engaged the chiefs and community leaders of Dollar Power. Then we were able to identify some of the underlying reasons why this had happened. Partly because of illegal mining that was going around, just because people do not really understand why those pillars are there. Now, after the community sensitization during our visits, in subsequent periods, the people here came to an understanding and recognized that these pillars are very important landmarks for the country. I can happily announce that there have not been any tampering of the pillars since those that were identified in 2021. And I must say that the sensitization that went on during that period was very significant and helped to achieve this.
Now we'll be joined on the line by General Emmanuel Kotia for more on this one. Major General, I'm grateful that you've joined us here. You've been to many border communities in the country as part of your work as coordinator of the National Boundary Commission. But starting from Dollar Park, can you share with us some of the challenges you have identified?
Thank you. Good afternoon for having me on the show. The solar power was one of the first areas that we visited when the machinery of the commission was put in place. And this was as a result of some security challenges that were raised by the Ministry of National Security. So when we got to Dollar Power, we realized that one of the key challenges was that they were removing and tampering with international boundary place, which we really are the custodians of these so far as the law establishing the Ghana Boundary Commission is concerned. Now, alongside that, there were thick plantations that were planted to guard, to preserve the boundary place. Those were also being uprooted. What we realized was that it was as a result of probably the illegal mining activities that people really wanted to clear the boundary place so that there will not be any demarcation between the two countries. And that was against the sovereignty of this country. It means that we will not have a boundary, clearly defined boundary that demarcates Ghana with Cote d'Ivoire. So the biggest challenge there was also the lack of access to Dollar Power. As your reporter mentioned, we can only access Dollar Power by helicopter, and even movement within the area, you need to use motorbikes. So I saw your reporter was on a motorbike, giving the support so far as this visit to Dollar Power was concerned.
Interesting. So how's the Ghana Boundary Commission collaborating with other state institutions to deal with these identified challenges?
Since our first visit, we had gone to Dollar Power on a couple of times, and we went to a number of agencies. The Forest Commission was one of them because most of the forest reserve there were depleted. The Minerals Commission was another agency that we went to, and then Ghana Geological Survey Authority determined the extent of gold in that area. In addition, we went on a reconnaissance visit with the Ghana Police Service, the military, and other security agencies to assess the situation. Clearly, one denominator was that there was the need to open up the place. As a result of that, we have facilitated through the Ministry of Roads and Highways for a 24-kilometer feeder road to be constructed. And as I'm speaking to you, the 48th Engineer Regiment, which is to construct that road, has moved to site, and road construction will start from next week.
Interesting. But what are the expected consequences if nothing is done about these challenges that you've identified?
Yeah, the expected consequence is that the state might not have full control in the area. The second thing too is that we can easily have a lot of criminality going across Cote d'Ivoire, and the blame will be on Ghana. So it is important for us to have control in that area, and also to have a clear demarcation of our boundaries. Because at the other side in Cote d'Ivoire, we have the security agencies clearly patrolling their borders. So that is a very important aspect of the work.
Now, you've also been working on the reaffirmation of Ghana's land boundaries with our neighbors. How's that going?
Going on very well. And let me say that from the 3rd of May to the 27th of May, we and Togo are going to start a reaffirmation exercise in the Volta region, starting from Kojo up to the northern parts of the Volta region. And that is being sponsored by the GIZ, the German funding program. Now, the two countries have met, the commissions of the two countries have had meetings, several meetings, and we are going to go to the ground to start this work. It's going to start with the sensitization exercise with the community. Because when you are doing this work, the community must be carried along, and they must understand what is happening on the ground. On the northern border, we've just come back from Burkina Faso, and there are plans. Once the Burkina authorities are clear, we are going to start reaffirmation on our northern border. We're going to Cote d'Ivoire in May, and we are going to draw up a work plan for us to start reaffirmation on the western borders, the land borders. The land borders. I want to be specific.
Why is it so important for us to do these reaffirmation exercises?
Because most of the boundary markings have been removed, like the pillars. Most of them cannot actually be found. In addition, we realized that some of the boundary markings that have been placed were really far apart. So as part of the innovation coming out of new boundary pillars, we're introducing apart from the main boundary pillars, we're introducing intermediary boundary pillars, and then we're introducing border crossing boundary pillars, in addition to monumental pillars that probably terminates to the sea, especially on the eastern and the western boundaries.
All right, grateful that you could join us, Major General Emmanuel Kotia. All the best in your effort to ensure that the right things are done in terms of the boundary commission there. Now, barely 24 hours after announcing a May deadline to secure an IMF deal, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta is urging caution as he points out an outstanding critical requirement, which is simply out of the nation's control. Ghana's creditors must submit assurances of agreeing to restructure debt to the IMF board. Now, this requirement, Mr. Ofori-Atta says, is not within the nation's control, despite admitting that the creditors have already given Ghana the assurances to do so. Mr. Ofori-Atta addressed a news conference late last night. He was asked how certain he was of the May deadline he had announced earlier in the day. Listen to him urge caution, but insists the nation has so far received positive assurances.
For your energy, interest, and positive reportage that the media has generated regarding our current trip to Washington for the 2023 World Bank IMF Spring meetings. I would also like to use this opportunity to give some updates on our engagements in Washington so far. With regards to our conversations with external creditors, our discussions with the fund and our development partners have been marked by a clear understanding of the need to restore macroeconomic and financial stability to Ghana and to promote our economic recovery as quickly as possible. We have highlighted the importance of revenue mobilization, expenditure control, and the implementation of decisive reforms to kickstart our growth. Encouragingly, there's broad alignment with the international community that our policy orientation is not only proactive but also well anchored. And they are convinced that they should support our overall ambitions in this regard. We are advancing our discussions with our international bondholders and other external commercial creditors. Earlier today, as you know, we hosted a successful webcast informing our commercial creditors of our economic and financial situation, while also highlighting the broad contours of Ghana's debt restructuring strategy. Our domestic debt holders have made significant sacrifices towards helping to reduce Ghana's debt servicing needs, and we are encouraging our commercial and foreign holders to also step up and contribute to the effort in the spirit of burden sharing. On the roadmap to an IMF board approval and beyond, in relation to the fund program, on the government side, we have made significant progress and have completed all prior actions agreed to move the fund. Additionally, the Paris Club has met and continues to meet to discuss the delivery of financing assurances. Based on our engagements, we expect these financing assurances to come in the next couple of weeks, thereby enabling Ghana's program to be presented to the IMF board for approval soon after that. Today's webcast was to engage our investors for their support for Ghana's program supported by the fund. We've also met with our development partners on the need to safeguard growth and private investments into Ghana. This government is determined to crowd in private sector growth to accelerate growth. In line with that, we also met with the leadership of the World Bank Group and the IFC earlier in the week and are looking to tailor a private sector focused strategy that ensures that over the next few years, the sectors that are vital to sustainable growth and job creation in Ghana will continue to be supported.
Economist Professor Lord Mensah is urging the government delegation to provide adequate information to all our creditors to ensure trust is enhanced between the two parties. He was speaking on the PMS Press on JoyNews on Thursday.
We need the debt restructure, no doubt about that, as far as the external debt is concerned. But you see, we have, underplay the complexity of our external creditors and how they stand. We look at the geographic, locations of these external creditors. We're looking at some of the conditions they gave us and how diverse they are.
Okay.
Very, very important. What we need now as a country is what we call creditor coordination. Creditor coordination, very, very important to ensure that information about Ghana, information about negotiations are equal in front of all our creditors. Very, very important. And I'm anticipating that the spring meeting will provide that platform for which, our officers will meet these creditors on, one-on-one, meet them together, talking about the Paris Club, looking at the commercial lenders from the Eurobond market, and then also the Chinese bloc.
Okay.
Now, you see, if you take the history of sovereign lending, it will give you a fair idea that China is quite new when it comes to sovereign lending. For the Western side, and then the Paris, bloc, with their experience, and then the happenings in Argentina, Greece, you can name those countries that have, gone through, default, and before default there was restructuring attempt. In that regard, you come to understand that for the Paris Club, there's not much of a problem. Even though when you talk about sovereign debt restructuring framework, we don't have it globally. There's no guidelines as to how debts are supposed to be. What we were doing...
The approaches are sometimes different.
Exactly, different. So, China at one block, The Paris Club is looking at, oh, fine, if we give Ghana that kind of debt relief, they'll use the money to pay China. And China is also sitting somewhere looking, okay, fine, if we go in to provide the debt relief, the monies will be used to pay, this Paris, club countries. So effectively, there's this kind of, back and forth as far as the minds of what the creditor space is concerned. And that is why I mentioned earlier that we need that kind of creditor coordination to ensure that they all come at the same level when it comes to, information about how we want to go about, this, debt restructuring.
Now, Chairman of Parliament's Finance Committee, Kojo Kwatin, who is with the delegation in Washington, says it cannot be business as usual once government secures the deal.
In the past, if you're on the side of government in Parliament, the expectation is that whatever government brings, you must help pass. If you're on the side of the opposition, your job is to oppose it. I think we need some kind of political consensus that an arrangement or a practice that has not helped us all these years and has driven Ghana to a point where we need to tell our pensioners that the money you invested with government, we are not going to be able to pay them to you as we promised. I think we don't have any choice but to review, to take stock of how we ourselves have conducted our business as Parliament, and going forward to say that we will act differently. Many of us feel very committed to that. There's no point in being partisan in Parliament and just okaying everything that government brings because you're in the same party, only for you to see your country go through some of these embarrassing experiences about begging people for forgiveness. Ghana is a very proud country. And I think what is happening now should signal to all of us as politicians that things will have to change. And Parliament, as far as we can, we will do our part. We would exert whatever influence we have in ensuring that the right thing gets done. It is also my plea to the executive that it cannot be business as usual, overspending our means and then borrowing to fill that gap. The evidence is that it has not been helpful. I don't doubt that COVID-19 and the Russian-Ukraine war have impacted us negatively. But as is the story here in Washington, when COVID came, those that had good immune systems were able to withstand it more than those whose immune systems were weak. We should learn a lesson from that and so conduct our economy that in future, even if another COVID would come, our immune system will be stronger than it was this time. That is the last point I'd like to make is also to us as citizens. It's very easy to look at political leadership and to say that they ought to have fixed things. And we hear that all the time. But look, Ghana, in terms of revenue mobilization, is a very, very tax non-compliant society. The culture of avoiding taxation is so strong that, look, as citizens, we shouldn't forget that political leaders, they come and go. Former President Rawlings, may he rest in peace. Former President Mama, may he rest in peace. They were in office, and there was a usual responses to them that, look, you have to fix the economy and you have to do things right. They are gone. We are here. And
you meant Mills, not Mahama.
Oh, did I say Mama? I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
No. I get your point, yeah.
Yeah, the late Mills. So the point I'm making is that as citizens, we should also play our role. It's not sufficient to be complaining about what political leadership has not done right. We must examine our own selves and see whether we have been very honest in the payment of our taxes. And if not, to see how we too would play our role.
As we're watching the poll still to come here, Ghana has been cited for multiple human rights violations, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and arrest of pressmen. Details as we have a chat with Amnesty International's Ghana's office. Stay with us. Welcome back from the break. Ghana has been cited for multiple human rights violations, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and arrest of pressmen. That, according to a U.S. State Department report focused on violations recorded in 2022. Now, this is coming a few months after Ghana's human rights record was examined by the UN Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review Working Group for the fourth time on Tuesday, 24th January 2023. Let's share with you details of this U.S. State Department report. According to the report, highlighting the 2022, human rights abuses in the country. It says in February, police chased a suspected traffic offender into a palace in Yendi and opened fire, killing another man and injuring 8 others with a stray bullet. On April 24th, police in Kranza arrested one Albert Donko, alleging his involvement in some armed robberies. He died while in police custody hours later. Police later fired live ammunition into a crowd of protesters seeking justice and killed a protester. As of November, police had not concluded internal investigations into all the above deaths. Now, it continues to say that on February 11, police arrested Oliver Barker-Vormawor, an activist critical of the government, in response to a series of Facebook posts. After initially charging him with misdemeanor charges of making false statements, police upgraded the charges to felony treason and held him in prison for 35 days before a judge released him on bail. Now, the U.S. Department continues to say that in February, some police in plain clothes attacked the Connect FM producer after he photographed the officers in a restaurant with their guns displayed and holding men in handcuffs. In the same month, police arrested the executive director of the Alliance for Social Equity and Public Accountability and a morning show host for accusing the First Lady of misappropriating public funds. The two were charged with publication of false news. The cases remained pending. It again says the law provides for criminal penalties for those who post false or misleading information online, with penalties of up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines. In August, the Kumasi Traditional Council also ordered Oyerepa FM to stop broadcasting after it broadcast a program which the council considered disrespectful of their office. A businessman had accused the traditional authorities of condoning destructive illegal mining in the region. The station resumed broadcasting 4 days later after issuing apologies to the council. Now, the statement also, or the report also touches on the LGBTQI+ community, which says the community reported police violence against LGBTQI+ persons. Civil society groups and activists reported police were resistant to investigate claims of assault or violence against LGBTQI+ persons. Stigma, intimidation, and the perceived negative attitude of some police toward the LGBTQI+ persons were factors in preventing survivors from reporting incidents of abuse. Now, LGBTQI+ persons in prison were vulnerable to harassment as well as sexual, mental, and physical abuse, which authorities generally did not investigate. So these are the snippet of the report that was released. Now, joining us on Zoom is Genevieve Partington, Director of Amnesty International Ghana. Grateful to you for joining us here, Genevieve. First, what do you make of this report?
Hi, good afternoon. The report came out, and it's actually similar to Amnesty International's Human Rights Report of 2022, which has also recently come out. So yes, this is very credible information. One of the key points that I can see is impunity of Ghana Police Service, regarding corruption and bribery. There's a lot of reports on abuses on that. And I think this is something that, the report, a lot of research was done to come up with this report by the U.S. State Department. So believe it or not, these are facts. They are happening in Ghana. There's another thing that the report touches on. I didn't hear you mention that. Perhaps I missed it. It's about the prison conditions. As at now, the prison has reached 150% capacity. And this is something that is really bad. The quality of food is terrible. The food lacks fruits, vegetables, just, the basic things that should be in a diet. And these are also human beings. So, Yeah, these are actually true. And I saw that the report also stated something on the amount, that is the daily allocation per prisoner, which is 1 cedi 80 pesos for food. Can you imagine surviving on 1 cedi 80 pesos in this Ghana? It's not possible for food. Even Kenke is 5 cedis right now in Jamestown. So I think, the government has a lot to do. Government needs to look into the issues, take them seriously, and look at them and do something about it. The CSOs have already been gathering and looking into the report in detail. Like I said, the report is very similar to Amnesty International's human rights report, which also covers 154 countries in the world. Ghana also factors in this, and the reports are very similar, speaking on the same issues. I'd also like to touch slightly on disability, because I think people don't really bring that up often. But regarding disabilities, that's also access for persons with disabilities as well is very disregarded in Ghana. Access to safe spaces, access to healthcare facilities, access to justice. Those are the huge issues as well. Yes, so, and then of course the report touches as well on sexual harassment. Yes, we have a Domestic Violence Act, but funny enough, we don't have a policy on sexual harassment in Ghana. So this is also true. But I know that Ministry of Employment is collaborating with certain CSOs to work on a sexual harassment policy. So at least there's progress in that. So everything else the report covers, Amnesty definitely sides with it, because these are similar findings to our own report.
But some of these findings, for example, the case with the prison service, we've known this over the years. Nothing really has been done about it. Is it the case that the state actors who are responsible have just decided not to act, or there's something more that we don't know? What must be the response from these?
I think it's different allocation of resources. I think maybe government hasn't necessarily prioritized this, but I think they really need to look at it. And it's just about allocation of resources. But government needs to understand that this is also an issue, because if you say this is an institution for reform and you are keeping these people there for just punishment and you are treating them horribly, when they come out, what are they going to do? They are going to go back to the same life they were leading. So we're not reforming criminals at all. We're actually hardening them in the system. So when they come out, they are going to be worse off. So I think we really need to take that seriously. So this is something government has to look at. I forgot one last point on mental health. People are still being tied to trees at prayer camps. I'm surprised that this isn't even seen as similar to the witchcraft camps, because it's the same process. You are ostracized, you are demonized for having a mental health condition, and then you are chained for several days and weeks without food, and people are trying to take the demon out of you. These are things that government has to regulate. So yes, so I support this report, and like I said, it's very similar to Amnesty issues. So
now, with the case of Donko, who was picked up by the police, allegedly for his involvement in a robbery case, who died eventually in the hands of the police, and then when people protested, the police further shot and one person also died. We understand per the report that these cases have not been resolved. What should happen? Because so many years after this, if it stays same, then you get the people not to trust in the police. So what must happen really?
So I think the Ghana Police Service, the IGP, really has to take up these investigations and take them seriously, because what's happening is that the people in general feel like the Ghana Police Service have some form of impunity. And if this is the case, then you have, internal police investigations being withheld from the public. So maybe there was an investigation, maybe there were findings, but why isn't this open to the public? Why don't we know what is going on? So I think for the Ghana Police Service to be more transparent, they need to have these investigations open to the public at least, so that we know if these cases were solved. I also believe they need to have a proper system in place to make sure the police that commit these crimes are, brought to justice. Because I think sometimes they may, handle it internally, and then, nobody knows what is going on. So I think Ghana Police Service needs to look into that as well.
Genevieve Partington, I'm grateful to you for joining us here. She is Director, Amnesty International Ghana. Now, moving on to other stories. It's a tale of uncertainty among staff of Ghana's biggest indigenous cocoa buying company, PBC, as it continues to post huge revenue losses. Now, according to its audited report cited for 2020, the company lost 1.9 billion cedis within a period of 4 years. In our latest online documentary, PBC Troubles, JoyNews investigative desk explores what might be accounting for the steep decline in PBC's market share from 30.88% in 2016 to 8% in 2021.
In August 2022, a circular copied all staff indicated that payment of salaries would delay due to the current financial challenges facing the company. When we spoke to the staff who pleaded anonymity in November 2022, he told JoyNews their salaries delayed for 3 months last year. It was not only difficult for many to fend for themselves, but their families as well.
Staff salary, they were owing us 3 months, but currently they've paid the 3 months. But as we speak, we don't know when our next salary payment is coming, and we have no idea.
He said it was now difficult for staff to access welfare loans from the company, which wasn't the norm in recent past.
Okay, the welfare fund is a revolving fund. So they wrote to us that there are no funds available, so nobody should apply for welfare loan. But with regards to the tier 3, we have paid, it is our money, and we have contributed, and it is 10 years now, and the agreement was that when it is 10 years, they have to pay all the monies to us. But it is 10 years now, and they are refusing to release the funds to us, which is making all the staffs, every staff is agitating. Every staff is agitating about this tier 3.
So dire is the financial situation that PBC suspended the intake of national service personnel for the 2022-2023 year. In a circular cited by JoyNews, the Human Resource Manager, William AUC, cited the current financial challenges of the company as the reason. In January 2022, PBC wrote to the Ministry of Employment about its intention to restructure the company, including downsizing its staff. It cited the prevailing financial and operational downturn, making it difficult to pay staff and meet its obligations to stakeholders. It said the staff who would be affected by the downsizing are those without establishment. Our sources suggest that when CocoBot secured the cocoa syndicated loan last year, it loaned PBC with an estimated 350 million Ghana cedis. Management used 50 million cedis to cover staff remuneration and other administrative expenses. The national projection PBC set for itself for the 2022-2023 main crop season was to purchase 170,000 tons of cocoa. But with the limited funds in PBC's account, this target remains a pipe dream and leaves staff in another boat of uncertainty on what fate hangs on the survival of PBC and possible payment of their remuneration.
About 4 years in baby, shares no market share no former echo. Because woman you so woman appointees, government appointees na do woman. It will go back who call na dwuma no kra we ni mo we no an see na betra so wonya adwuma. Ti market share no di company di ba woman tumi nka anokre no enkyere pieces na ye no wo ye adwuma na ye nso no ye ne farmers ne tie kra se ho and you go pharmacy in situation, can drew baby, and any more company investigator, see a farmer pharmacy. Yaya to be copelo, we are who's our children, and to see a war pharmacy in Kakra, on Tezo, on Betiko, October, no much here. It be your correct to be cover 1 year, not pharmacy day. A cratch of Fornica. As to company, you move your own physical crab. As you can't go cry, Omunya Bima, the better than when you be the Abobosi. ATM or Brian, woman company, no. It is a young beat and empty form, a woman company, no, so home. Almost the woman that said, almost you can almost deny, you know.
This is still the JoyNews, the pause on JoyNews. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more. Stay with us. Now, welcome back from the break. Let's talk about labor issues, because in just about 2 weeks, Ghanaian workers will join their counterparts across the globe to celebrate Labor Day, a day set aside by the International Labour Organization to recognize the important contribution being made by workers as well as issues militating against their welfare. Now, ahead of that pause, we'll begin a build-up with interviews and special features on this very important issue, and the focus is on the employment relationship today. Joining me in studio is private legal practitioner Ekua Kun. Okay, yes. I hope I got it right.
You got it right.
Ekua Kun. Yeah. Okay, Igwa Infanifi.
In actual fact, me fegwa me fi sekunde.
Oh, sekunde mo. Also ni fi sekunde ifa.
Okay, if you back you hold.
Oh, if you correct one there. Anyway, but let's first of all look at this. When do we say there is a worker and employer relationship?
Okay, so we say there's a worker and there is an employment relationship where you have an employer and an employee who have contracted. The employer has contracted the employee for their services to work for them within under a contractual relationship.
Okay.
So you may have an employer who would engage someone. It's called a contract of services for their services for compensation. So let's say the worker would offer their services, and then there will be compensation for their services.
Okay.
There's a difference between a worker who is fully engaged and an independent contractor. And the level or the difference between the two is determined by the extent of control that the employer has over the worker. That if, of course, it's an independent contractor who has come into work, you don't have any control per se because they've just come in. So it's got to do with the extent of control. And then who bears the risk, assuming anything goes wrong? So assuming you're in here, I believe you're all workers of Joy FM. Your relationship with your employer is different from an independent contractor who comes in, let's say, on a contract basis to just offer or paint or do anything. So one, the extent of control, because once you're in here, your employer can decide, I mean, whatever arrangement, how you're supposed to work and all that, your level of hours of work and all of those. And then also the risk, assuming anything happens to you whilst you're working here, who bears the risk? Of course, the employer. And then also got to do with what you call vicarious liability. And the law, when you say vicarious liability, it means that assuming anything happens, you, whilst in the course of your work, you cause injury to anything, who bears the risk? Again, it will be the employer, because anything you're doing whilst you're working is being done with their authority or under them, so they bear all those. So
that includes when I am coming to work and going after work.
That is very subjective. Assuming you're coming, that's a tricky one. Okay, assuming you're coming into work, you've not started working yet. Your working hours are 8 to 5. Anything that happens outside those hours, of course, you're on your own. But anything that happens within the 8 to 5 period, For instance, you've been tasked to, let's say, go and cover a program. On the way, if anything happens to you, who bears the responsibility? It's your employer, because within that period, you're still working. Yes.
Okay.
And then, of course, things like tax purposes and all those help to determine who an employer, that employment relationship.
Okay.
Yes.
So it means that if I should hire a mason to do a by day for me, the same conditions will not apply to when I'm
because they are independent contractors who are working, whom you have contracted for their services. Now the difference, it's very tricky. If you're an employee, you're working, it's your contract of your services. But when you're an independent contractor, you're contracted for your services. So the difference is off and for. So that when let's say an independent contractor comes in, one, he's not, I don't think there's any serious contractual relationship. When he comes in, you know, he can just decide to walk out because he's not regulated. Whatever happens here, he's on his own. He bears his own risk and all of those. So those are the determining factors. I think when he comes in, he would even rather be the one to tell the Joy FM management that I can finish this job within this period. It's not for the employer to determine. But whereas you come in, the employer would say that you are supposed to be working 8 to 5. But human is an independent person who is just coming to, he would even determine his own, perhaps hours of work. I mean, what times he would come in and all of those. So those are the difference.
Okay.
And then, of course, things like pension and all of those also comes into play. So
it comes into play when a contract. It doesn't matter the contract. It doesn't affect the contract.
For instance, once you're working, there are laws that regulate what has to be done. So if one of them, like I said, because it's contractual, once you're working, things like remuneration, your SNED and all of those determine whether you're a worker or an independent person who has just come in.
So the independent person will not be covered by this SNED and all of that. It won't happen.
Yeah.
How do we build the employment relationship, such that there will be that? First of all, we know there has to be cordiality between the employer and the employee, but we get to a point when you realize that the cordiality is not there. How do we build it?
Now, you realize before we had the legal regime, you had situations where there was so much unrest because, of course, sometimes you have a situation, I think sometimes between the employer and employee, the bargaining power is not equal. One is a bit there and the other. So sometimes you have situations where workers or employees feel they are not being treated so well. So there's things like issues like labor unrest and all that. So that is where you have the legal regime coming in, where laws are enacted to regulate the relationship. So although, yes, you have the employer who has employed you, laws will regulate how the relationship should run. So you don't have, so there's cordiality, there's harmonious working relationship and all of those, yes. In Ghana, I mean, there are several laws that regulates the employment relationship. We have the Constitution that regulates. For instance, you go to Article 24, it states, I mean, the rights of the worker. And then you have other laws. We have the Labor Act that actually regulates the relationship. You have the SNET, I mean, the Pensions Act. You have Factory and Workers, Act. You have various laws. I mean, workmen's compensation that will regulate. For instance, assuming you're working and then you're injured in the course of work, that regulates or it determines what kind of compensation. Either you're seriously injured or you become disabled, or maybe death arises out of the injury, what perhaps you are entitled or your family is entitled to. And then there are quite a few laws. But the main one is the Labor Act 2003. I mean, 2003. Yeah.
So with the compensation, if still you work outside your work hours and anything happens to you, that does not fall on your employer.
It doesn't fall.
Okay.
Because you're on a frolic on your own. So you're otherwise it widens it, and of course, I mean, these are insurance matters, and also if you're on your own and the employer is supposed to be responsible for that, then they would open a floodgate in that there will be so many, and I mean, it could, cause problems for the employer as well.
Usually, like you said earlier, when it comes to bargaining, the employer is up there and the employee is quite, down there. What happens when an employee finds out that his statutory payments are not, being followed through by the employer? Taking into cognizance the fact that you still have to maintain that cordiality in terms of the employment relationship.
One, it depends on the kind of environment in which you are. Some organizations have what you call trade unions, all of that assisting. Because, for instance, maybe as a single worker, sometimes you cannot fight. So, in some organizations, workers are allowed to form unions so that with one voice they can actually ensure. So you have what you call collective agreements that regulate. So even by the time you are coming, there's already a collective agreement that determines what the employer is supposed to do. Then you have, like the labor commissions. Within the Labor Act, you have a labor commission that is supposed to determine or mediate or arbitrate on some of these matters. Of course, if your employer is not also paying, you have the opportunity to, if you want to, you can, report the matter as well to the various authorities for redress.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
but then, of course, you can have discussions with your employer for maybe there may be reasons. So when there's a harmonious working relationship, then there's a room for dialogue, where although you have the employer there, there's room for negotiations between the employer and then the employees, so that it makes it more harmonious and a congenial place to work. Yeah.
In your years of practice,
yes,
how extensive is this practice of some employers deliberately, underpaying or not even not paying statutory payment like SNED contribution and income tax and all of that?
Any employment relationship that is over 6 months, that extends beyond 6 months, there must definitely be, that's what the Labor Act says, that there must be a document. So if someone is going to engage you and is not temporary, less than 6 months, and it travels beyond one, what you should be asking for is like a contract of employment or whatever document there is. And in there, you should know, you should study to find out what are your entitlements in there. So, if they're not paying, then like I'm saying, if there's an HR, you should find out why they're not paying, and you should ensure, that they do.
So how widespread is this? You've been in the sector for some time.
Yes, all the laws are there. There's a Pensions Act, all the laws are there. It's just that sometimes the enforcement. But then that's why we're actually doing this, because sometimes you may have instances where, of course, people set up, but they don't even know what they are obligated to do. So they may set up an organization and say, this is what I want to do, especially within the informal sectors that they set up. And so all I know is that at the end of the day, I'm even paying you off the desk or table. It just puts money in an envelope and that's it. But once you engage someone and it's a permanent work, it's not just the remuneration, but the employer is supposed to be paying various other entitlements like your SNED. You're supposed to have certain entitlements as well. And then SNED is a requirement once you're working. It is. It's not. It's compulsory actually. Yes.
How do we ensure that some employers are not exploiting the unemployment situation of Ghana to then employ people without even employment contract? Like you said, if it's beyond 6 months, you should be given employment. But we are in Ghana. We know people who are employed without contract at all. So
you could actually take the matter up at the Labor Commission. Sometimes people are a bit. We have workers who are a bit hesitant in going to some of these institutions, but sometimes it may be because they think, they may not even know. So sometimes, you should, take steps to ensure that they do what is right. When you have an employer who is not doing what is right, I think that it behoves on you to ensure that you, I mean, take you to the right, institutions to ensure that what they have to do, they actually do it. For instance, when you go into the Labor Act, there are rights and responsibilities for both the employer and the employee. When you go to Section 8, it has all the rights. We have all the rights of the employer. Section 9, is provisions on their responsibilities. And then you go to 10, the responsibilities, the rights of the worker. And then you go to 11, it states their responsibilities. So at least within in there, you know that as contracting parties, we have the law stipulates what each party is supposed to do and not supposed to do.
Okay.
For assuming, for instance, you go to Section 8, because he's the employer, he has the right to set up, and he has the right to cease operations anyway. So once the law allows anyone to set up a business, if business is not running, they can decide to cease operations. For instance, they can determine the policies they want to regulate or guide how the business must run. They have the right to discipline because it's their institution, it's their firm, or it's their business. So they have the right to instill discipline, enforce discipline, and then, and determine how the operations should run and all of that.
Okay.
They are allowed to do that. When it comes to their responsibilities, one of them is ensure that, of course, they are supposed to pay you the contracted pay that they have told you, or wages or salaries that they have told you they would do. They are supposed to ensure that you're working in a safe environment, because if you have come in and it's relatively safe in here, because the employer is supposed to ensure that once you walk through these doors, you're safe from injury and all of that, because they should make sure it's safe. So you didn't come in and find spills all over where there's a possibility that you may trip or slip and fall and all of that. What other? Pay, remuneration. They're supposed to ensure that it's a safe place, like I said, and various others. Yeah.
When can an employee decide that, well, I think I need to go for a renegotiation of my contract? At what point within the contract can an employee decide to go for that renegotiation?
When you go, when there's a contract, contracts are always fixed, unless it stays in there that there's a possibility of renegotiation. For instance, even assuming outside the employment relationship, contracts are supposed to be fixed. You get me? Unless it stays in there. So within the period, the determined period, it's fixed. That gives you certainty. That gives you certainty and comfort that no one will shift the goalpost. So assuming you're going in there and you have a contract that says that, okay, you've been employed to do this work for this number of duration. These are your job descriptions. You'll be paid this salary. These are your working hours. I think that you expect that everyone will respect what is in there, because a document is sacrosanct. So if it stays in there, then maybe in the course of the working period, if, for instance, there's a possibility of promotion and all of those, then of course, then that is where you may call for negotiation, because perhaps your work is being changed. Okay. You're changing your working rules. So then there may be further negotiation, let's say on salaries and all. But then everyone comes into Joy FM and you expect, for instance, that there's equal treatment for everybody so long as you're a worker. What may change maybe wages or remuneration because of the level of work or the quantum of work you're doing, or the volume or the level of responsibility you have in there. But I don't think that a junior staff will think that, okay, because they're junior staff, they're going to be treated differently, because you're all in here as workers. Okay. So you don't expect that to change unless there's a change of circumstances. You may, for instance, change where maybe operations change, or the employer is For instance, you go into an organization or a firm or a business, and at some point they moving into a different, completely different operations that is different from what you initially came into. Then those are the circumstances where maybe there will be the need for renegotiation. But then that means that the previous one would end. The previous
one will
end
for the new one to take over. But do I get an understanding that if say you've been employed to do job A, it hasn't changed, you're still on job A.
Yes.
And if it's 10 years, you'll still be on the same level, same salary, no increment whatsoever.
But then you expect your salary, everyone expects progression, right? So when you come in, let's say at the most basic junior level, you are supposed to, the employer is supposed to help you with training. I mean, one of their duties is ensure that you don't remain static. They're supposed to train and retrain you, provide you with the necessary tools to make you work. Of course, we all grow. We all grow physically, and we must grow in the work environment as well. So if you have an employer where you see that there's no career progression, there's no opportunity, then of course, I mean, you may want to take your own decisions, whether it's a place you want to be. So you expect, at some point, you may want to have discussions with your employer, because in there, you expect that there should be some progression in your career and all that. So those are things that you can have discussions on.
Okay.
And then you agree. So it's a contract. So one person cannot start negotiation. It's for the two parties
that is to agree.
To agree.
What role does unionism play in ensuring this, employment relationship we're talking about?
Yes, union, like I mentioned, because sometimes in an employment relationship, the bargaining power is not equal. Of course, the employer is always there. So sometimes it's as an individual employee, it's very difficult for you to go and negotiate. I mean, in our parlance, even sometimes even sometimes your own supervisor, you're a bit. You find it very difficult, like a manager,
to approach him.
To approach the person. So it makes it easier when there's a collective force that can come together as one voice to negotiate with the employer, because the employer is there and you were there. I mean, it's difficult because sometimes when you try negotiating, there's a possibility of dismissals, or you being I won't use the word, I don't want to use the word victimized, but the possibility of you have this feeling of, oh, if I go opening my mouth too much, I can get into trouble. So it's easier to have, so the Labor Act allows unionization where, collectively workers can come together and then unionize and speak with one voice and to negotiate with the employer for better employment benefits and all that.
There has been instances when we've had companies trying to prevent their workers from unionizing.
They're not. They're not supposed to do that.
Exactly. What's the position of the law on it? If they're not.
You see, it's even unlawful for them to prevent, and then they cannot victimize or take decision or you cannot be victimized for trying to unionize. I mean, it does usually happen in most of the time in private organizations where, so it gets very difficult. But the law allows and permits unionization.
I asked this question because I know of I'm not going to mention the name, but I know a company in Takrady that prevented the workers from unionizing, and those who led for the workers to unionize were unfairly treated along the line.
Yes. So
if it happens like that, what kind of remedy do these people have?
I mean, like I said, the institution or the body that has been created to determine some of these things is the National Labour Commission. So some of these things you can seek redress at the National Labour Commission, and if you're being unfairly treated just because you're trying to unionize, then of course the employer can be taken up. But then mind you, when it comes, because of the freedom, we're all free. Sometimes there's a backlash also, because under there's precedent that says that, we are free people, and an organization is seen as also an entity on its own. So sometimes when you try to unionize, I've seen a few of these, so that you take them on, and then the next thing you know, they start dismissing or terminating people's employment under other, so not at the provisions of the law, because the law allows, because you're contracting parties, an employer can actually terminate you without any reason.
Okay, interesting.
Yes,
and not pay and not pay severance.
And the reason is because you can walk up to the employer today and tender in your resignation. So once you can do that, they also allow.
No, but the law says you need to give.
So provided a notice period is given. Exactly. But then even the law says that they can terminate, when you go to section 17, for instance, they can terminate by giving notice or payment in lieu of notice. Exactly. So for instance, you're there one day and you're just giving a letter. And so instead of, for instance, you're entitled to 1 month notice or 3 months. And then what they'll just simply say is that we're paying you the 3 months in lieu. So it's a bit...
Is that different from the severance package anyway?
You're supposed to pay the severance package, and all other entitlements that are due you prior to your employment being terminated are supposed to be paid to you. Okay.
Well, I'm sure once we discuss all of this, all these will come up. So I'm grateful that you could join us on the first edition.
Thank you very much.
So much. Lawyer Egwakun. Your name is so sweet. Fancy. All right, so thanks. This is still the pause, but moving on. Ghana's coast holds a number of significant historical monuments, such as forts and castles. Environmentalists warn of a looming disaster as the raging sea is eating up the land and posing serious threat to these facilities. About 2 meters of the shoreline is swallowed by the sea annually due to unregulated illegal beach sand winning. Hundreds of youth at Kojo near end their incomes pillaging the sandy white beaches of Ghana's coastline. Here are excerpts of Joy Prime's latest documentary, Accra Galamsey, produced by Emmanuel Jivenu, exploring the impact of illegal beach sand winning on the existential threat of climate change and rising sea levels.
The existential threat to lives and property along the coast, also of grave concern, is beach sand mining.
Yes, no worries for you. Yeah, be our Galamsey. Yes, our rare Accra Galamsey for you.
Interestingly, some people living along the coast are now seeing sand as their Galamsey, or sand winning as their Galamsey, which is very unfortunate.
The increasing threats from coastline erosion was one of the factors that influenced the relocation of the presidency from the Christianborg Castle to the Jubilee House in 2013. Currently, the Christianborg Castle is facing serious erosion, with portions of the wall facing the sea falling off.
Several areas along the coast, not just Christianborg Castle, but several areas along the coast are vulnerable. Every facility within the coastal area has a certain level of vulnerability. But how do we ensure that we enhance the resilience of communities, resilience of infrastructure, resilience of assets within the coastal area? So it's all encompassing. But unfortunately, because we don't have a workable management plan for the coastal area, anything is just going on.
It was quite frightening. I was there, and the evidence is vivid and it's available. And we've taken up that information and working it around with the relevant institutions to see how it can be done. It calls for a stakeholder meeting where we will be able to judge and then together find a solution to all that.
Other national landmarks, including the Independence Square, forts and castles, as well as UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Volta, Greater Accra, Central and Western regions, are in danger of being claimed by the encroaching sea in the next century.
Sea defense is part of the physical constructions that can help mitigate the action. We normally want to rely on natural contributions towards the protection of the coastal line, but it must go hand in hand with their physical construction. That is how come the government has committed so much money and continues to do so to ensure the protection of the sea from destroying most of these facilities. As a nation, we have a situation on our hands, and I agree that something more concrete needs to be done in order to avert possible loss of these important historical monuments.
Man's activities, especially coastal sand mining, is waging war against nature. As long as the earth will have life, man's existence will deeply be knotted with the sea. Experts say the beach sand mining is an existential threat to Ghana's coasts. It's crucial for a multi-sectorial approach to tackling this catastrophe. Indeed, man has to learn to live with nature and not against nature. Amma has lived here with her family for 2 years. Her house is less than 50 meters from the sea. She's always lost in her own thoughts of safety. She's worried about the waves breaking down her house and killing her and her 7-month-old baby.
July, I'm the so taton kitten, and the baby no shed them. Into what them one, I mean, the meetings are then ye boom. When Procopan and Miss Solin and Pajama Bano, minimum, me, you know what them, when about Kusu ye, your flash, and now yet even look at the stuff about it to me, so point to me, you see. I say, see, breeze now come, Mamma, now say. And I make Paja, baby, no, and I don't know question my me for be them. When I want and be best see me, yet dear Nasa, a circle now. And they said, I'm young, she see me, not skank, met to Africa.
Amma is unable to afford rent elsewhere, so she has decided to risk staying here, praying for God's protection. But even in the glare of disaster, individuals still mine sand here.
I feel rough on the Muka say, Mamma, and yes, I'm Puno. Ababa no muda muda do muda mo na imponim bra betu ye wa ha na no mo ni omuku super.
Some Shebu residents are blaming the construction of the Glyphate Sea defense for their woes.
No me wana can show you say to can we be no was sharing what mo no you na alone you na can about me to the new be to mo 22 wo yen to mo 22 ye be ni agbene wo ye shipon ye se kwa wo can short ni na agba go be she ebaraga chako to na age aga fe ne gete ne gemba koni age san show na koni ndo aga fe pressure lo na agba ko yawo she ebaraga na yin te fe mo gemba anye agete abako ni ebawo ni te na chi e fe pressure yawo e bi wo be e han ni kaji isho wo e no pressure di ona gaje fe magbe wono e bi e ke e ba bon tuji e ko mo e ke e ko mo tuji.
They are appealing to the government to extend the seawall to cover their area so as to reduce the impact of the rising sea levels.
She will be jolly. You were assembly a beer, were MP a beer, were you look by Comuni a beer. I mean, I know she won't not go only put enough fear away. Robert near fair to walk by me here, where you will be, won't pack back. But
is sea defense the ideal solution to the impact of coastal erosion?
I've always been saying that sea defense is not the right approach in managing coastal, challenges, especially coastal erosion, because sea defense is basically fighting erosion, and you can't use an artificial means to fight a natural system. So for you to be able to fight a natural system, you must develop a natural means to fight the natural system. Artificial means can never and has never been the solution in fighting a natural system. So sea defense are always not a solution. Basically what we do with sea defense is that we either prevent the ocean from taking sediment away, or we block sediment within the transport path, the sediment transport path. We block and trap sediment so that we build beaches within where erosion is a problem. But in blocking sediment, you are depriving other areas of sediment. So basically what you've done is that you've transferred the problem from one location to the other. And that is why in some areas you realize that in Keta, for instance, sea defense is doing very well, but downdrift erosion has increased. Why? Because the volume of sediment that would have gone to build the beaches and gone to, create a balance in the sediment budget regime are now being blocked and trapped. So the reduced sediment will definitely have an impact. And these are some of the reasons why the downdrift side begin to erode if they are not eroding, or you have an enhanced erosion if they're already eroding. So to me, sea defense using hard engineering approach has never been a solution.
Now, after a difficult period of COVID-19 spread, there is worry about a lack of National Health Emergency Fund to deal with future pandemics. A non-government organization, Send Ghana, says government must establish a fund specifically dedicated to dealing with future pandemics. The NGO has also commenced a project to support MMDAs across the country to raise revenue locally to set up health emergency funds. There's more in the following report.
Ghana's economy is still reeling under the effects of COVID-19. At the height of the pandemic, government borrowed heavily to fund the fight. Advocacy group Send Ghana is calling for the establishment of a National Health Emergency Fund.
We brought together all the districts that we are implementing this project to share their experiences. I mean, like you heard here today, some districts have already put in place some structures for epidemic preparedness. Others are yet to do so. We decided to bring all these districts together to share. I mean, there's learning and sharing. When you share, then you can learn from the other person and what strategies they are doing or what strategies they are putting in place to prepare for epidemics. And as we know, epidemics are events that are unplanned, they're unpredictable, they can happen at any time. And so it's important that districts or government agencies are able to put together structures in preparedness for outbreaks as and when they happen.
Communications Officer of Send Ghana, Joanna Ankoma Ade, says a National Health Emergency Fund will cushion the country in case of an emergency health situation like the COVID-19 pandemic.
In 2020, when COVID happened, we all saw how government had to quickly put together funds, how even to a point that we had to borrow and then get support from our donor communities. I mean, this support might not always be there, and so it's important that countries such as Ghana put in place some funding or dedicated budget line of funding for epidemic preparedness. I mean, COVID came in 2020, then we had the monkeypox, then we have Lassa fever now, you see. So, I mean, there have been a trend over the years of disease outbreaks. Who knows what might happen next? The sole purpose or goal of this project is to get the government of Ghana to establish a public health emergency fund. So this fund will be used to fight diseases as and when they happen. We don't want to wait till an outbreak happen and then we are going to borrow, then we have to call private sector to give us money, then we have to, ask, then this money is there. This is something that we can always take from.
Meanwhile, the District Director of Health at the Brim South District in the Eastern Region, David Mensah, says it is important corporate entities come in to support districts in deprived areas.
For emergency preparedness, nobody can be fully prepared for an emergency, for all emergencies. But you put in place measures to ensure that when they do happen, you are able to respond to them appropriately. And that is the more reason why this fund that we are to set aside is important. But if you come to a district where funding is a challenge, as the Brim South District, currently we are doing our best. We have put in place measures. We have put in place systems such that the health facilities have emergency response teams in place with that assistance. These structures will need funding, and that is what we call on civil societies and organizations and individuals to come to the aid of the districts to help us put in place such a fund to help us manage and get ourselves prepared adequately for potential outbreaks. Train them
Let's still stay on the health sector because Ghana's Minister for Health, Kojo, says diabetes is set to become one of the leading causes of death by 2030. And so Ghana and other lower middle income countries need to spend more to fight the disease. Speaking during the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the Health Ministry and a French multinational healthcare company, Kojo said fighting and treating diabetes must be put on high on the national agenda.
There is a high financial burden on persons living with diabetes. The testing kits, the glucometers, the strips, and medication, just not affordable for a very huge proportion of our population. Although some part of the cost of care is covered by the health insurance authority that we have in our country, extra costs in terms of care, time, and nutritional support are borne by the patient, their families, and providers through out-of-pocket payments. Due to the chronic nature of the disease, the cost of care trends to be lifelong, further driving families and communities into poverty. And in some instances, we can even talk about catastrophic expenditures based on the poverty level of whoever is afflicted with the disease. Diabetes is a significant public health challenge that requires all to come on board. Indeed, the Sanofi and the Ministry of Health Affordable Access to Diabetes Care Program is a timely intervention necessary to enhance the management of diabetes in our country, as persons diagnosed with the disease have a greater chance of having access to equitable, comprehensive, affordable, and quality care for better outcomes. The stipulated objectives of the program seek to address some of these concerns, and the Ministry of Health is ready to render its full support towards its successful execution. The good news was that this partnership we are entering into with Sanofi is one of our planned activities as a way of implementing our NCD's policy and one of our strategies to try to make sure that Ghana attains universal health coverage by 2030. It is my hope that with such initiatives, we will continue to strategically position Ghana as a global health leader through complementarity, cooperation, and effective partnerships.
Meanwhile, head of Ghana's National Diabetes Management and Research Center, Dr. Yakoba Tiasi, called on government to fund diabetes like it did when Ghana recorded cases of COVID-19.
Diabetes is said to become one of the leading causes of death in our country and elsewhere by 2030. We are proud as a ministry. We have developed and launched the National NCD policy and strategy.
So diabetes is behaving like an epidemic. It is looking like an epidemic. So why are we not treating it like an epidemic? There's evidence to show that in any epidemic, the less you invest in it, the higher the mortality. Thankfully, we have all lived through an epidemic. In 2020, we lived through a time many people will never live through, a disease covering the whole of the world. But before 2020, diabetes was already covering the whole of the world. So we were already living in an epidemic, although we chose not to see that epidemic. How do you handle an epidemic? An epidemic is handled very easily, and we did that very well in Ghana. And today, we are all sitting here without face masks. But a few things happened in 2020, which has brought us here without face masks sitting together. There was massive education. Everyone knew about COVID. And even my illiterate patients will call me and say, "Doc, I think I have COVID because I am coughing." On that note, Honorable Minister, I'd like to plead and implore that the Diabetes Center, which we started renovating a few years ago, will be complete for us so that we can offer the excellent care we are meant to. And I'll come and see you in your office after this meeting.
Now, ulcer patients are advised not to skip meals for longer hours as the situation leads to increased acidic content of the stomach, thereby causing severe pains and in some cases duodenal perforations. Now, as Muslims the world over are observing the 30-day long fasting from dawn to dusk, what is expected of an adult Muslim diagnosed of this condition? In this following report, my colleague Anas Sabet seeks to find answers as he engages experts in health and religion.
Health experts say that majority of ulcer patients may face complications including the recurrence of the disease and ulcer bleeding as a result of regular fasting in the month of Ramadan if they do not opt for proper medication after being diagnosed of the disease. These may develop life-threatening complications if they do not take extra care of their diet and medications. Medical Director at the Techiman Holy Family Hospital, Dr. Ernest Amiao, revealed to JoyNews that prolonged fasting may increase the acidic content in the fasting person's stomach, thereby causing severe abdominal pains.
In this period of Ramadan, if a patient has been diagnosed of ulcer, be it gastric or duodenal, gastric I mean stomach ulcer or duodenal, if the patient is having gastric ulcer, for example, ideally in this period of Ramadan, prolonged fasting would also mean that your acidic content in the stomach would increase and it would irritate the ulcer, causing pain, abdominal pain.
Dr. Ernest Amiao noted that even though the ulcer patient can still go ahead to fast, it is highly not advisable for a patient diagnosed with severe forms of ulcers and are on medications, as this could cause complications for the patient.
If the pain is so severe and endoscopy is done to confirm, if patient is on medication, for example, and has to take the medication within a period of time, we deal with it in hours. So 8 hourly, where you have to take your medication. Then we advise that you don't fast at all, because eventually you have to use water to take your medication. Then advisedly do not observe the Ramadan, because it can really create problems. And indeed, if care is not taken, for those who do not adhere, and in the elderly, it could actually even lead to gastric perforations. And that becomes a surgical condition to deal with.
He was, however, quick to admonish patients diagnosed with ulcers to be mindful of their choice of meals and as much as possible avoid acidic fruits and hot, spicy foods if they want to observe this religious obligation.
So we often would say that ideally it's good to fast anyways, but if you've been diagnosed of ulcer, then during this period of Ramadan, you could know the kind of foods that you would have to eat, your choice of foods you have to eat. Of course, you could eat your normal, if you're breaking fast, it should be step by step, slowly with water, taking light diet. But specifically, we advise that you avoid spicy foods, hot spicy foods, and then foods containing acidic contents like the oranges, the grapes, the pineapples, these kind of foods, and then spicy foods, you can't avoid them.
Whilst fasting is obligatory on adult Muslims who attain the age of puberty, the Quran in chapter 2 verse 183 explicitly exempts some group of persons from practicing this important obligation. Malam Abdul Hanan Khidr is an Islamic scholar. He tells me that patients with chronic ulcers are part of these exemptions.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Alhamdulillah. Just as I recited the ayah, the 2 verses, Allah is saying that, O you who believe in Allah, it is written unto you to fast the month of Ramadan as it was written for the people before you, that is the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. Then, to get to your point, said, if you are sick, or those of you who are on a journey, travelers, you can count the number of days you will miss and do it in other days that are not within the Ramadan period. So we come to the point of those who are having ulcer. If medically you are declared as somebody having ulcer, you shouldn't just be having some stomach pains, then you get up and say, I have ulcer. You have to go to a medical doctor, let him confirm that you have ulcer. Let the medical doctor advise you that with your ulcer you cannot fast, or with your ulcer you can fast on medication. If you advise that you can fast on medication, then you follow that one and fast on medication. But if it is that you cannot fast at all, even on medication you cannot fast, anytime it is due for fasting in the month of Ramadan, you will feed the poor.
Now, persons diagnosed with ulcers must endeavor to undergo medical checkups at least once before and during the fasting month of Ramadan to enable them to do so without complications. Anna Sabit, Joy News, Tichiman.
On that note, we wrap up today's edition of The Pulse. There's more on myjoyonline.com. But